You see them everywhere, right? Security cameras, card readers, all those little panels on the wall, they're just part of the background of our lives. But if you ever really stopped and wondered what's going on behind the scenes, what makes it all work? Well, today we're going to pull back that curtain and look at the invisible network that keeps these systems ticking. So let me start by posing a little puzzle. I want you to picture a security camera way out in the middle of a parking lot, just sitting on a light pole. And you look closely and there's only one single wire running to it. So how in the world is it getting power and sending back crystal clear video through that one single line? There's no separate power cord in sight. What's the trick? Well, the solution isn't magic. It's actually a whole series of really critical, high-stakes decisions that engineers and designers have to make. And believe me, getting these choices right is the difference between a system that actually protects you and one that's just for show, one that's going to fail you the moment you need it most. So today, we're going to walk through those exact decisions. First things first, you've got a signal, but it's totally useless if it can't get from point A to point B, from the camera to the recorder. And that brings us to the most basic, most fundamental choice you have to make. What kind of cable are you going to run? This is the lifeline of your whole system. Really, this choice boils down to a classic trade-off. On one hand, you've got your standard copper Ethernet cable. Think of it like the local roads in your town. It's cheap, everyone knows how to use it, it's easy. But it's also prone to electrical interference, kind of like radio static messing up your signal, and it can't go very far at all. Then on the other hand, you have fiber optic cable. This is the interstate highway. It uses light, so it's totally immune to interference, and it can go for miles and miles. But the on-ramps and off-ramps, the electronics on either end, they're going to cost you a bit more. So how far is not very far when we're talking about copper? Well, here is the golden rule that every single technician has burned into their brain. 100 meters. That's about 328 feet. If your camera is any farther away from its network switch than the length of a football field, your standard copper Ethernet is just not going to cut it. The signal will die before it gets there. And okay, let's say you decide to go with the fiber optic highway. Guess what? You've got another choice to make. There's multi-mode fiber, which uses a cheaper light source, kind of like an LED. It's perfect for connecting a few buildings across a campus. We're talking up to maybe 500 meters. But if you're trying to cover a massive perimeter that stretches for miles, you need single-mode fiber. It uses a much more powerful laser and can shoot data for kilometers. The funny thing is, the cable itself is actually cheaper, but the electronics that drive it are more expensive. It's always a trade-off. Okay, so we figured out how to get our data from the camera back to the server room. We've got our lifeline. But what about power? That camera on the light pole is still just a dark box. Now we have to solve the power problem. We've got to feed the beast. Let me introduce you to the #1 enemy of sending power over a long wire. It's a little thing called voltage drop. The best way to think about it is like water pressure in a really, really long garden hose, right? The farther the water has to travel, the weaker the trickle is at the very end. Well, it's the exact same thing with electricity. You might start with 12 volts leaving your power supply, but after running down 500 feet of wire, you might only have 10 volts left. And for a sensitive piece of electronics like a camera, that's not enough. It'll just turn off. So how do you fight this voltage drop? Well, the traditional old-school ways are pretty straightforward. You could use a thicker wire, that's like using a wider hose, it just has less resistance. You could also start with a higher voltage, say 24 volts, knowing it's going to drop, and then have a little converter at the camera to bring it back down to what it needs. Or, you could just move the whole power supply closer. But notice, none of those really solve our one-wire puzzle, do they? And that brings us to the elegant, modern solution that answered our puzzle right from the very beginning. It's called Power over Ethernet, or PoE for short. This technology is an absolute game changer. It lets a single, standard Ethernet cable carry both the data signal and the electricity the device needs to run. It's that simple. Of course, not every device has the same appetite for power, right? A simple little camera doesn't need as much juice as a big, complex one. So PoE comes in different flavors, different standards. You've got your basic PoE, which is plenty for a simple fixed camera or a card reader. Then you step up to PoE Plus, which can handle a camera that pans, tilts, and zooms. And the newest standards, like PoE++, can power huge multi-sensor cameras or even entire door controllers, all over that one little Ethernet cable. But what if you can't run a cable at all? I mean, what if you need a camera across a river or in a historic courtyard where you are absolutely forbidden from digging a trench? Well, that's when you have to cut the cord entirely and go wireless. Now with wireless, it's not enough to just be able to see from one antenna to the other. You have to worry about something called the Fresnel Zone. Just imagine an invisible, football-shaped tube of air that surrounds the direct path of the signal. Here's the rule. If more than 40% of that invisible football gets blocked by a growing tree branch, a new building, or even a delivery truck that parks in the way for a few hours, your signal quality is going to tank, or just drop out completely. And, going wireless opens up a whole new can of worms when it comes to security. So here's the bottom line. You absolutely must use strong encryption, like WPA2 or even better, WPA3. Think of it as a super strong, unguessable password for your wireless link. But even with the best encryption, you're still vulnerable to signal jamming, where an attacker can just blast the air with radio noise and knock your camera offline. It's a serious trade-off you have to consider. So let's say you've picked your cable, you've solved your power problem, you've connected all your cameras, everything is running perfectly, and then the power goes out. This is it. The ultimate test of any security system is what happens when the grid goes down. Let's walk through the most critical minute of any power outage. The very instant the grid fails, something called an uninterruptible power supply, or UPS, kicks in. It's basically a giant, smart battery that provides instant, clean power with zero delay. Now, while that UPS is holding down the fort, your building's generator, your long-term power solution, is starting to spin up. And that can take anywhere from 10 to 60 seconds. The UPS is the bridge that perfectly covers that vulnerable gap. Why is that little gap so important? I mean, a 30-second delay, what's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. If a modern IP camera loses power for even a split second, it has to completely reboot. And that boot-up process can take up to 5 minutes. So without a UPS, that 30-second generator startup time means your entire facility is completely blind for 5 full minutes. That's why the UPS isn't optional. It's absolutely essential. Okay, so we've covered the big decisions. But honestly, the difference between an amateur job and a truly professional installation often comes down to the little things, the unseen dangers and pro tips that you only learn from experience. Here's one you'd probably never think about, but it could literally save lives: fire safety. See, not all cable jackets are the same. If you're running a cable through a plenum space, that's the area above a drop ceiling that's used for air circulation, building codes require you to use special plenum-rated cable. Why? Because in a fire, this cable is designed to burn slowly, and more importantly, to not release toxic smoke. This prevents the building's own HVAC system from accidentally spreading poisonous gas everywhere. It's a huge deal. And finally, I have to share my favorite piece of real-world, hard-won wisdom. It's a rule known as the janitor's outlet. Here it is. Never, ever, ever plug your main security server or your video recorder into a standard, unprotected wall outlet in a closet or a hallway. And the reason is simple, because sooner or later, a janitor will unplug it to vacuum the floor. I know it sounds funny, but it is a catastrophic and shockingly common point of failure. You have to hardwire it or use a special locking plug. So there you have it. From the type of cable you choose, to how you power it, to where you plug it in, a security system is really just a long chain of critical decisions. And the next time you see that lonely camera on a light pole, you'll actually know what the invisible network of power and data that's keeping it alive. And that leaves us with one last question. Now that you can see this hidden network, what weak link in the systems all around you have you never noticed before?